So our next speaker is Sreevatsa. He's going to be talking about his ATDC work. He's been part of Auroville for over a decade and is currently an elected member of TDC. His work in TDC, among coordinating other aspects of planning, also looks at sort of water governance and planning and technical parameters. Sreevatsa is a registered architect, co-founder and executive of Tapassia's design studio and Auroville unit. And through this, he seeks to find innovative and sustainable solutions using design as a tool in effecting a change in the society we live in. So, Sreevatsa.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think it's a very positive step that we are all coming together. That's really incredible that we have started this journey. I am here to actually give you an update about the DDP work which has been started in TDC. We started it 2-3 months before. Before starting about what we are doing in DDP, I also want to address the larger community through you all, because I know through the video recordings, I have an opportunity to reach a much larger audience. So I would like to take this opportunity also to address them. And why I would like to actually talk about first DDP, because the most common thing is they say TDC has to prepare the DDP. It's not done yet. Where is the DDP? That is the silver bullet. We all have to solve it. I mean, I think it's good that we just take a step back, relax, and understand what is DDP, because DDP actually, if you have to understand, is a legal terminology. It's a legal planning term. It's been used differently in different parts of that state. Unfortunately or fortunately, we don't have the same terminology which is used all over India. In some places, it's called zonal plans. In some areas, it's called local area plans. In Tamil Nadu, it's called DDP. Now, what is DDP? Obviously, the abbreviation is Detailed Development Plan. And what gives it the legal respect or the legal weightage is that it is defined in the Tamil Nadu Town and Country Planning Act. It mentions what a DDP is. So if we confer to that minimum standard, I think we just pass the door and we can call that it is a DDP which has been prepared. Now, what does a DDP provide? Now, DDP gives you not only plans, it gives you policies, it gives you phasing, it tells you how to implement all these things in a very workable detail level so that the implementation can proceed where different systems has to overlap. And it also gives you a standard to guide the development. It's basically a tool which connects all the dots into something within a certain framework. Like I said, this has a clear legal significance. So it's a very important step that we have started to prepare this. And in my experience, which I try to recall, when mothers, when she started, she started Livelihood the Auroville and Pothus for All. I always used to wonder why she started only 2 of these organizations. So somewhere I feel planning is one aspect of it. But apart from that, we also have to address economy and governance. So DDP is not going to solve all our problems, but I am sure this will act as a catalyst for us to address the other 2 things in a very effective way. So now we know it. Let's start from the broader level and let's zoom to where TDC is in this aspect. Now, like I said, in the Tamil Nadu Town and Country Planning Act, the first thing it says is DDP can be prepared only by a planning authority. So that is the first important step which mentions. Now, apart from that, what does it mention as being as a definition of DDP? It talks about what are the layouts of the building. It talks about how constructions and alteration can happen, how land acquisition can happen, what is the rationale for acquiring lands, how can the boundaries be distributed, all the infrastructure, how it has to be laid, where it has to be laid, what is the capacity, all the details regarding infrastructure, what is the allotment of land, housing, parks, and all the zoning regulation bylaws. Now, this is what actually, these are the minimum which defines. Now, if you could actually see, mostly it talks about housing, buildings, land. There is one which talks about green area and water features. But this is the minimum which expects us to fulfill in creating a DDP. Now, where are we starting from DDP for Auroville? See, ideally, not ideally, we have to work within certain framework. So when we went through it, when we had a lot of discussions, we met a lot of experts. So what we see is there are these 4 important layers which needs to be addressed while preparing a DDP. Now, what are those? Obviously, the master plan perspective 2025. It has to be derived from that. That provides the larger framework, that provides the policy setup. Second is the state planning norms and standards. It could be the laws of this land, it could be the fire control norms, it could be regulations for physically challenged, whatever it is. These laws has to be respected. And there's something called the Amrit guidelines. Now, what is happening is right now, the government at the center in Delhi, through the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, has formulated something called Amrit guidelines. Now, what they intend to do is to ensure that urbanization happens in a very planned way. They have come with a certain set of standards and guidelines. And I think we should not lose track of that, and it will be in our favor if we could prepare a DDP which respects that, because ideally, when all the towns are being prepared as per Amrit, when all these things are stitched together, we should not be left out. One important thing would be is right now the state government has started working on regional plans. They have started to divide Tamil Nadu into regions, and they have asked to come up with the regional plans. Now, each regional plan would also come up with a perspective plan, and it is important that that we need to identify where we stand in that. Otherwise, probably it might be very difficult for us to really merge and overlap with the surroundings. So these are very important considerations which we have to take into while preparing it. And the fourth, the most important is, of course, the Galaxy model and Roger's urban design principles, the Galaxy model of 1968. Now, everything starts actually from here, so this is the starting point. So what we are formulating is a DDP which works on all these 4, which takes care of all these 4 and respects them to the fullest. Next is what are the aspects of the DDP which we actually will be covering. We would be starting from a regional context, obviously understanding where Auroville stands, how it is making impact, how the connectivity are, what is the economic impact. The regional context is something which is very important for us to understand. The master plan context and the history of the galaxy. Now, these 3 are something which will give us the clear introduction. It will set the tone for how we move forward. Then we start by doing analysis. There's quite a lot of usually analysis, land use, existing land use, transportation infrastructure. There's quite a lot of analysis about the existing situation has to be made. And then we work on understanding the site potentials, frameworks and constraints. Now, frameworks, if you see, there are quite a lot, when you have to really understand about the framework, because they talk about the urban design. The most important is the urban design framework, which already has been created by Roger, which we need to stitch together, and we need to probably evolve it and take it further. There are frameworks for water, there are quite a lot of things which we need to understand and work. The proposals are the ones which works on infrastructure is a proposal. Proposed land use maps, proposed infrastructure lines. So all these things are proposals, and the strategies. Strategies are something how do we regularize something which has been built without an NOC or something like that. What is the strategy to incorporate them? What is the strategy to ensure that we work on achieve certain mobility? So these are the things which will be worked out. And then environment and safety. Environment is not only ecology. We have to ensure that we define our pollution norms, where we have to move as a town collectively. We have to define the safety of the town. How do we move forward, especially when it comes to elderly people, physically disabled, safety for the children. And then we have complaints to government policies and formulation of policies. See, there are already certain policies and laws in the state government, in the central government, which we have to be compliant with. But at the same time, we also have to, we need to formulate certain policies, like how do you allocate housing, in a certain way? How do you build? How do you do, how do you use the water? There are quite a lot of policies which also needs to be tackled, because giving maps alone is not going to solve our problem. It has to be addressed along with the policies which we are creating. And then, of course, the development rules, the building bylaws, FARs, the architectural guidelines, the urban design guidelines, all these things will be there. Then we'll be talking about resource mobilization. Now, these are all the technical part of it. Then we go about how this could be implemented and in what phases it could be implemented. One of the questions which was asked by 2-3 members to Helmut was if the construction happens, how is it going to happen? I don't foresee everything will start haphazard construction here, there, and everywhere. I think there will be a phasing plan where we have to ensure that that it happens in a certain phased way, that all these things are mitigated, and at the same time life can go on in the town. It can't be everywhere at the same place. So the roadmap, now what we are trying to do is, the first stage, there's an inception report which is being under preparation, because it's not that TDC is preparing. We are looking at Vastu Shilpa consultants as a lead consultant in preparing the DDP. And apart from that, we will also be collaborating with other consultants. There's a mobility and an infrastructure planner from Bombay. We are in touch with them. Anupama, she is now part of the technical team of TDC. We are in touch with Andrea Camerata. We are reaching out to all the consultants who have been part of TDC in the past. Jacqueline, Omar has been great advisor to us. So there have been quite a lot of people who have been helping us and supporting us in moving forward. So this inception report will help us to define the roles, responsibilities, and to see how, as a team, we could move forward. Then we have the data collection and analysis. Then the urban form parameters. Urban form parameters are defined by Roger, which, as I mentioned, there have been quite a lot of sketches and other things, and appropriate planning standards. So this is the first stage which we have worked on. Now the second thing is, we will be working on identifying proposals. See, the uniqueness about Auroville compared to other towns, which most of you would be knowing, but just like I said before, I want to address the larger audience in the community, is we have a certain form and we have a certain way of how the form is grounded. So we need to understand that and we need to move from that. Unlike in Pondicherry or somewhere else, where an urban sprawl and an urban sprawl is tried to be contained. Now here we are actually not starting from an urban sprawl, we are starting from an urban form with a clear definition, with zones, with usage for zones and many other things. So what we would be looking at is to identify the pockets and the densities based on that urban form. So we need to first identify how do we get that population spread out across the densities. Now this would help us to formulate the infrastructure capacities, the mobility capacities, all these things would be formulated based on that. The next is we will be coming up with an urban design guideline which will help us to formulate the mobility pattern, because now we have the densities, at least we have made simulation of the forms, we come up with analysis, and then we have a certain urban design guidelines, and then which will also help us to understand how the mobility could work on a very preliminary level. And the most important is the surface water flow, how the surface water flows. And this, based on this, we'll be coming up with a preliminary proposal for sectors. Now, these are very preliminary level, conceptual level things, which would be now taken up with infrastructure planning. Because based on this, the infrastructure plans would be formulated on a preliminary level. This would eventually help us to come up with guidelines, final infrastructure plan, layouts, demarcations, phasing plan, implementation plan, and finally a submission of a draft TDP. Now this is the roadmap which we are looking at. I might also be a little bit wrong. I think Mr. Rajiv is the best person. Probably it might also go for a change. We might shuffle it here and there. But more or less this is the extent to which what we are looking as a part of DDP. So this eventually means we would start with understanding and respecting the realities. We also respect the urban form and how do we ground that urban form to the reality on the ground. And I'm extremely happy that Dreamweaving session is an attempt to move in that direction where we understand the form and we see how we could actually match it to the reality. And not only, like I said, not only are we going to decode the form, but we are also going to work out the details of how the urban fabric can be built and how it could be phased, how it could be implemented. So ideally, we feel if it's done, I think my contribution to Auroville is done. I think I can retire and go back and live in Ooty or something like that. So what are the layers in DDP which we are trying to attempt? Why this is important? Because every town has a certain unique ways, and there are certain unique layers which needs to be addressed. Like if it's a historical town, heritage and culture will be an important layer. If it's a hill town, like obviously you have forest and ecology will be an important layers. So we have actually identified 6 layers. Town planning, because it also talks about the laws, the planning standards and all these things has to be confirmed. Urban design, because we have Roger's concept, this needs to be understood, and we need to ground that. GIS, because of the Amrit guidelines, so that we match it and we do it in a certain standard which is compatible to the government. Infrastructure, environment and mobility. So these are the 6 predominant layers which are being addressed. So this is where actually we are also looking at the consultants to start to work from. This is the theoretical part. And right now, if you want to know, we have already completed the data analysis stage. There's a land use which needs to be prepared that has been completed. So we are at the stage where we could actually take the urban form forward. So that is where we are. And we would also like that. I think still Vastu Shilpa consultant has to vet it, and probably they might come back and say, look, we need more data, more details. I don't know, for mobility, we need to do an outer cordon survey. We are open to it, but these things will be pursued in a very speedy manner in the coming months. Now, Auroville city area, as you all know, this is what actually, from the GIS database which we had, this is what it comes to. Now, we also archived quite a lot of studies. This is just an example. We archived around 10 pages of studies. That is what we found out. There's a huge amount of studies. Maybe some might be relevant, some might not be relevant. So it took us quite a lot of time the last 3 months to really archive, go through this, clean it up. And many of these things, data which has been there, we had to convert it into a GIS database, which could be usable on a planning level. Now, this is the proposed land use which is actually present in the master plan. I'm just giving you an example of what are the other things which we have collected. Now, for residential zone, if you see, we took what mother has mentioned about what residential zone. We took what has been written about residential zone by the mother. And we also looked at the master plan as to what it talks about. So we have just roughly put it up so that the consultants could actually understand how different is this residential zone when you talk about a residential zone in an outside world. Now this is very important because it's important that we need to define where we are and who we are to the outside consultants. And these are the important, I would say the pearls, I would say, from the master plan, where it talks about the FAR, it talks about the ground coverage, it talks about a living space per person, it talks about 30 square meter, it talks about 50% unpaved area. All these things are all planning policies which has been defined in the master plan. And we also started archiving and finding out the sketches of Roger. Like if you see, this is one of the line of force. So many people have this misconception that line of force is one humongous, huge box. But actually it's not. When you look into his sketches, you will be able to understand he has quite a lot played with climate, he has quite a lot played with the experience of it. So these are also very valuable for us when we are able to present it to the consultants and we are working in understanding the urban form. These are some of the other line of forces. So you could see each of the line of forces are completely different. They are not exactly the same. Yes, so I come to the city center part of it because I think the crown, we are mostly talking about it. I just want to present what are the data which we have collected in regard to that. So we all know that the city center is actually the one which is inside that crown. And it's interesting because all the zones kind of merges in the city center, and it's a microsome of what Auroville could actually stand from. You have the schools, you also have the residential, you also have the industrial facilities. So, and you also have the social fabric. So everything built in for us to start evolving. I find it very fascinating that there is somewhere a zone where everything overlaps, mingles, and in a very harmonious way. Now, what you see here is what is it the city center develops. The aims of the city center is these are things which we found from the past archival data and everything, which we have kind of compiled. So to manifest the urban tissue density and the architectural quality, like I said, this somewhere merges everything, brings everything together. And this would set the flavor for us to how to grow on a much larger scale. Urban management, financial sustainability, infrastructure, parks and gardens, mobility, you name what is required in a town, everything has to be addressed when you are talking about in a city center. Maybe this you can't probably say when you are talking about any other zones. But in this part, all these things come together, and if you are able to work on creating a good city center, I think creating the rest of the town should not be much of a problem. Now, this was one study which was made by Anupama under Roger's guidance. What was interesting also for me is there's quite a lot of cycle paths. I don't know, it's not so clear, which keeps meandering. I could see they had worked out even a toy train over here because these are all kindergartens. And the existing buildings have also been integrated into it. That was, you see, this is the existing solar kitchen, the footprint of the solar kitchen, if you could recognize. And this is this Porombo clan which actually goes through. So this is a study which we also had to go through. And the drainage and watershed, unfortunately, there are certain things we didn't, the data were lost. So we had to get the data, we had to rework on certain things. And this was one. And then that hydrology, I think geomatics team has been mapping it, identifying it, so we took those data from there. The geology was already there from water harvest, which we had to convert into GIS. This is the soil infiltration. These are the existing land ownership, existing buildings and communities which we had mapped, the roads, Porombo clans and everything. Pathways, all the pathways which we had mapped. Land use, this is land use which we need to take it with the state government for getting a certain legal validity. Now, this is something which we anyway have to prepare. Now, if you see in this, this is being prepared as per the Amrit classification. And then this is a sub-classification of Amrit which we had created. These are all the Amrit classification and sub-classification. And then water supply lines have been documented, sewage lines have been documented, existing electricity has been documented, telecom, galaxy footprints and overlays. So interestingly, everybody must have known by this time. So in the industrial zone, you see all these line of forces actually fly over the crown. And similarly, if you see in the residential zone, the line of goodwill and this small line of force are actually in the city center. So we also talk about the line of forces. We also talk about high density. We also talk about our economic values and system if we really have to look into it. If you're talking about a line of force which is really high over here, are we talking about making candles sitting in that line of force, or what are the industries which are going to come there? Agarbattis? No, I don't think so. Maybe something else would be there. So it's very interesting questions which are actually there, which needs to be discovered. For me, the galaxy is not about the answer because the answer is there. I think what we have to seek is more and more questions. The minute we seek more and more questions, then I think we have really understood it. So yes, so this is I hope it's quite fast. Yes, so just to conclude, like I said, there are certain things which we are trying to match to the norms of the government. There are certain things we have to work, understanding the realities of the ground, the geographical realities. And at the same time, we also have to be faithful to the vision, and we have to respect the master plan. Now, within this broad framework, we are trying to work, and I think this gives us an immense amount of flexibility and immense amount of scope, and something to do something of world class. And what I have seen personally is you need to have a very high quality of output to really bring these things out. I don't think so. A galaxy expects a certain amount of mediocrity. It requires a certain amount of faithfulness in interpreting it. And I hope all of us, we will be able to do it. And I also take this opportunity to invite you all to also become a part of the technical team of TDC, because right now I think the planning team, we are quite moving ahead. We already have 3 urban planners who are working in TDC. We are having quite a lot of well-respected consultants who will be collaborating. Pretty soon we'll be signing the agreement with Vastu Shilpa consultants to be our lead external consultant in preparing the DDP. So, and of course mobility. So I think there's quite a lot of learning opportunity also there. This is something which I've always respected and I've always cherished being part in TDC. And I want to also extend that part of TDC to all of you. And you're all most welcome to be part of the technical team so that we could actually start moving in getting the DDP done. And in terms of timeline, we have a very, very, very short timeline to get things done. So it's always better when we all move together and we start working and start putting our energies in a certain way. I'm sure many of the discussions which we are having today might not be even relevant in the future once we start progressing in a knowledge-based discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sreevatsa. So opening up for questions from the Dreamweaving Architects and also Vesta Shilpu Foundation. So, any questions?
Okay, where do I start?
Well, if no one can put their hand up, Julia has a question. Oh, she did, I didn't see. Sorry, you were hiding.
Okay, so my question is regarding the data analysis. Like I understood the data analysis part has more or less been done. And I mean, if I understand correctly, we are here meeting for a certain reason because a lot of us would be working on the dream weaving process. So it's just for my understanding and clarification. Would the result of the dream weaving also be a part of the data analysis, or will it be a part of something like an input to the design itself, or where would it fall? And another question that I have is, if I see the steps that you had shown, the data analysis is one, and then eventually after several steps it comes to the phasing and the implementation. So that's another thing, like you mentioned about the timelines. If you could know a little bit more about those timelines and a little bit more about the implementation and phasing, so that would also help us know while doing the dream weaving itself, that are there some areas which are to be prioritized? Is it really the thing that crown is what is to be prioritized right now? Or is it, is it just something that we have to take it as given, or can we rethink about that? So yeah, just about the little bit about the timelines and the priorities or the phasing that is there.
See, the data analysis part, whatever data we could collect, we had presented. And I'm sure there will be quite a lot of other data analysis which needs to be done, maybe land suitability analysis, quite a lot of other analysis which needs to be done. Now, this would be done in collaboration with the consultants. So the consultants might come up with it and it will be taken up. Now, the second thing is when you want to know about the implementation, where the output of the dream weaving would happen. See, it's very interesting for me because last time when we had invited Omar, David, and we connected with Mr. Rajiv, and where there was a presentation they made about dream weaving, it was good, but then they said, look, there are certain things probably you are missing. There are certain standards. There's some more layers which needs to be added. So, which means there are quite a lot of other layers which would be needed to be incorporated. And definitely this would form the base, a kind of the layer on which the other layers also has to be overlapped and probably has to be merged, maybe tweaked or whatever. So this is for the consultants to see how we could evolve it. Now the third is the phasing. What we are talking about is the phasing. See, a DDP is for 5 years, and obviously when you do a phasing, you do it for a 5-year period. The uniqueness about Auroville is not only a township, but you can also see it as a project. Because all the land is under one, the property is under one ownership, the foundation, and we have a very strong structure. So you could also see it as a project. No? So ideally, a DDP would be created for a 5-year phasing implementation. And it will be spread out obviously based on that, or it might also come because, like I said, the economy and governance is something which is not under the preview of TDC or DDP or whatever it is. And unless that part of it is not strengthened, there's no point in only doing the implementation. But we, as creating the DDP, we have to split it up based on that 5-year thing, and it will be proposed accordingly. Now, how it is getting implemented now, that is something as a community we have to see. So, I'm not clear?
I still didn't get the answer.
For the phasing?
Slightly about the phasing and also about since right now, if I understand, our Dreamweaving is really focused on the crown. So that's how it's supposed to be.
Yes.
I'm not questioning
Yes,
the process.
about the crown.
Is it because the crown is being come up with as a priority to some implementation thing, or is it just a given that we...
No, if you see in one of this presentation, like I showed you, see the crown and the inner part of the crown holds the crux of everything. All the zones merges there. All the layers are there. Now, if you are able to do the city center part of it right now, as a priority, and then we go to the next stages of implementation. As simple as you don't want the construction vehicles to keep disturbing this every time. If this is completed, you go from inside to outside, right? That will be the most logical way, whether it's in terms of the execution. Or also if you look into the galaxy, all these zones merge here. So you are actually using it as a pilot project to understand all the zones, understand the economic life, understand the social life. So everything we are actually touching on it. So that is why we are taking the crown as the key I would say the key element to manifest Auroville. And implement, the phasing is for the whole of Auroville. The DDP is prepared for the whole master plan area, and the phasing and the implementation schedule would be done for the whole of the master plan area. So probably the first phase of the phasing might come with crown. I don't know, maybe the city center 3/4 might be there. I don't know, this is something we have to see. But the phasing would talk about what should be implemented in the first phase, second phase, third, fourth, fifth, or it would be 10 phases, I don't know. But it will talk about phasing, and it will also talk about how it could be implemented. So it will give you guidelines as to how things could be implemented. There are certain things which could be taken up with the housing service. What are the organizations? Do we need to go out? How do you raise funds? All these things would be touched on it. Is it clear or still? Okay.
So I have a few questions. The first question would be those sketches of Roger Auger. Could those be shared with the Dreamweaving architects? Because I think it would maybe give some insight into because they've been kept quite secretive, I think, until now. So that would be one request. The other question I have is there's always talk about FARs. And as we don't have plots in Auroville, the land is all one. How does one actually define an FAR? Is then the land segmented into little plots to define those FARs, or how is that going to be? I don't know if this is the place to answer that question, but it's something I've been trying to figure out, and it's a very vague kind of. I don't think the FARs may be the best way to define whatever the built-up area, but okay. Apart from that, another thing is land ownership map. I think for everything we are doing, it's something that also needs to be shared because it does give a clear indication as to where we are at with Auroville and what is possible and how we can move forward. Because when we see the current speed of development in the Greenbelt and in the city area, but predominantly in the Greenbelt, it's scary. And it very clearly indicates that the Greenbelt is very quickly getting lost to developers all around. So that limits the actual Greenbelt which we will have available to us. So I think we have to take that very seriously and perhaps plan for more Greenbelt-like areas inside the city as well. Yeah, that was basically.
So I think the Roger's questions, I think what we have, I'm sure anyway, Jacqueline is going to present the archives of Roger or something like that on Crown. So that will also give you a good idea. And this anyway, I think it's printed and it's It's displayed in the town hall in one of our displays. So there's nothing to hide about it. Yes. We could share it. There is nothing like now. In fact, we would be happy to even display it as a museum archives, like to show to the world, like these are the sketches of Roger. So no, I don't think so. There's anything to hide about it. And second thing, it's a good question about FAR.
Just I want to construct this because we already made the big exhibition of all the kinds of projects 2 years ago in town hall for months. Then you could have seen all the sketches.
But I'm talking about like you go to an exhibition, you see something, it's different than actually buying the painting and having it in your house. Then you can refer to it later. Otherwise you have to go there and take pictures of the exhibition, it's a bit weird. So I'm talking about sharing and sharing that we can all get inspired or not by it.
Sure. Yeah, so that. Yeah, it will be shared. So TDC is already moving in that direction, so there's nothing to worry about. Second is about the FAR. See, that's a very good question. Like I said, we are also a town, and at the same time, we are also a project. Right? Now, if we are a town, obviously, we would be having a clear demarcation of the site plots and other things, where FARs and FSIs will be there. But since we are also a project where all the land comes under one ownership, now this was some question which we also had with the town and country planning organization when we met them. So my assumption is that based on the footprints of the galaxy, I might be wrong, but this is purely my understanding, that is what we would be considering it as plot, and based on that, the guidelines would be given. So let's say you have a line of goodwill, or so you actually define a little bit in and around the footprint as to what the impact of it will be happening. That could eventually become the plot, and you have an FSI defined for it. This could be one possible solution. This is something which needs to be worked out. And the third is about the green belt. Yes, I think I'm happy you brought this out, because when we talk about why this hurry in building, last 2 years before, when you see, I completely sympathize and agree with you, because from Kuilapalayam to Certitude, there is no development. Right now, we see the development has come all the way till Certitude, and probably another 2 years, maybe till Sola Kitchen, right? Maybe another 2 years, I beg, probably till Matra Mandir. So I think now we really have to move forward to tell the world, look, this is Auroville. We are actually working on it, and we need all your support. And yes, that's also being pursued. Now, if you see, one of the things which I had mentioned in the DDP also talks about acquisition of the land, because it gives us more credibility. If you go and say, I need a land, why do you want it? Because Auroville wants it. That can't be a legal answer to a state government. Now, when we say, look, this is a social experiment, and we are talking about, let's say, a crown over here, which has the potential to help humanity to move forward, and therefore we are acquiring this land, then I think we have a much better case to do. And how do we tell that? DDP and the master plans are the only way to tell, because it's sitting over here, we need it, right? So I think that land acquisition is already, we have been pursuing it, it's happening, and this will add more weight and more strength to that. And the faster and the better we are able to do it, we'll be able to reach there with a much stronger force. And
but the DDP doesn't cover the green belt, right?
Yes, it has to also cover the green belt.
Because the green belt is where all the land is going.
Yes, the green belt.
Yeah. In the city area, most of the land has been acquired.
See, the green belt, if you see, is a little bit more complex, because if you look into the whole of Auroville Plateau has a ridge, right, which runs from northeast to southwest. Now, traditionally, the ones on the western part has had farming lands. That's why you have all the villages, with that Sidenchavdi, Kotakarai, Alangupam, Rayapudupakam, because and then you have all these lakes and everything. Now we have marked them under a green belt, but they are actually growing much faster than us, right? And maybe in 2 years, the whole of the things would be urbanized. We can call it as green belt, but I don't know, how do we tell the people that is a green belt? But we have much better chance when we are looking into the eastern side, right? When you start from Amiabri, from Certitude till all the way till Revelation, probably we have a much faster.
Yeah, so then we have to make sure that if we can't acquire the western side, we have to make sure that we protect the eastern side. Sorry.
Yes, so like I said,
that's what I'm trying to say is it's all the land which is being acquired and which is already part of the villages, which we will never be able to acquire. We have to compensate for that by protecting what we have and acquiring what we can, and maybe moving, rethinking certain green areas.
See, if you look into the DDPs of the city area has a certain clear-cut directions. Now, what I presented to you was more or less towards the city area. Now, if you see the DDP for the green belt, will more or less conform to how DDPs are created in the outside world, because there is no special. We speak of it as a green belt, but in terms of urbanization, we are not looking at urbanizing the green belt area, right? So it has to be prepared in completely a different way, and has to be addressed, where we also have to integrate the aspirations of the villagers who have been there for generations, for thousands of years. There's this temple, Irumbai temple, which has been there for thousands of years. So, there's quite a lot of fabric which is over there. So we need to create it in such a way. And like I said, the city area is a project, but the green belt, I don't know how we could call it as a project if we have to integrate Irumbai temple and Alanguppam. So there we really have to take it up with the different governments. And green belt also we need to deal with two governments. There's the government of Pondicherry and then there's the government of Tamil Nadu. So when you do a DDP, you do a DDP in the green belt separately for the government of Tamil Nadu. For the Pondicherry, if you see, already the government of Pondicherry is already working on a development plan for Alanguppam. They have already published draft plans. So the best case for us is to integrate that. I doubt whether we can go erase it and re-rate it. I think that might not be possible.
That half answers my question.
Or
We have about 15 minutes left.
Yeah, we've got 15 minutes left, and we have quite a lot of questions coming. What I understood from the beginning is that architects taking part in the dream weaving will get priority on the questions. So on that basis, just so everybody knows, in the next 15 to 20 minutes, we've got Induja, Fabian, Omar, Manu, Ganesh, Neha. And if there are no more architects and we get through that, then there would be Julio, Mark, and Tuan. So, right. So I doubt that everybody's going to get to answer. And that's why these pieces of paper are there. So you can write your questions down. And so if we run out of time, the questions will be answered later online. So next would be Induja and then Fabian. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to get my glasses at some point and I'm going to see people, I swear. Hi, I have two questions. One I can still try to eliminate because it's about the larger thing, but the other one, which is directly related to Crown and the dream weaving, would be, especially in the western part of it, we have two canyons and we have the lines of forces crossing across the Crown. And there is a critical situation of having a Ode Perambok, a line of force which is quite contrasting to that, and we have a Crown, which is a pedestrian based movement. So in that case, will we have the same map that was there?
There's the Ode Perambok.
Yeah. So in this area, will we have guidelines which we can already take into account, because we would like to know what TDC is thinking of the larger aspect, because there are some water catchments there. Will there be a planning done taking into consideration the water and the aspects on the ground, or should we just go thinking there is nothing over there, so that
erase everything and we start from a white paper?
No, because it is for architects, like at least for me, who is very new into all these things, it's a bit of a critical place to think about very contrasting elements and try to bring a solution at that level. So I would like to have, if already TDC has thought of some guidelines that can feed to us, to our process, we would really appreciate that. That would ease our thing, and that is one thing. And the second one is, I saw the existing land use according to the Amrut categories that was presented. But as I understood when I was working there, it was done, the existing land use was done. And then the following step was to prepare a proposed land use, because we have a different, very special zoning of different 4 different zones. So according to that and stitching it to the ground reality, because for example, we have Kotakarai and we have galaxy footprint even over there, which I suppose may not be possible to build. But we can, and then the idea was if we have that and get it through government, the proposed land use, and then we will have the guidelines of buildings over there, even in those areas. That was somehow my understanding. So will it mean there will be a proposed land use pursued by TDC and taken to the government, and along with the guidelines for each plot for development and everything, and we come back and we start developing according to that? Or if we say we can't actually consider the Kottakarai area into our city because it is developing in its own way, and the galaxy footprint that is over there also accounts to the amount of development in the city. So are we going to have a compensation plan or something like that for those kind of critical areas in other places also? And we have some Perambuk roads, which is giving access to other private lands within the area. So we are also not able to think about the timeline when we can maybe consolidate the whole of city area, and eventually the road Perambuk can be, given to Auroville, if that is possible in government, whatever legal things, because there will be no other private lands which need the ease of easement that can use this road and all. So that is still a larger question. I don't want to. So the second question need not be answered now also because it's not relevant. But the first question I would like to.
Yeah, see, the first thing is regarding water. See, obviously, water is a very fundamental layer. If you ask me personally, for me, the water lines is what actually creates the green lines over here, because we are a rain-fed region. Like how the water flows is something which is very important for us to sustain our town. So water lines will be respected, has to be respected. There's no doubt about it. Now, how we find a technological solution to overcome it is the key challenge for us. Technological solution, policy solutions, whatever it is. And second, in terms of policies, we do not have any policies right now. And I believe the Dreamweaving is all about decoding the whole form of the galaxy and trying to see how it can land beautifully in the ground reality, right? So I don't want to give too much of constraints to make sure all these things are become distorted. Third is regarding the land use. See, the land use, when you were there, we started working on the land use, but unfortunately, we had to rework quite a lot of it. So what you're seeing is an updated one, which was prepared with the help of planning students from IIT Kharagpur. And we had to take this with the Town and Country Planning Organization in Delhi, where they also checked it. I think also Vastu Shilpa, they had an expert who actually also helped us in refining certain things. So this is an existing land use, but the proposed land use will be prepared at a later stage. See, until we know where the line of force exactly sits, what all these things, and then based on that only we could create a proposed land use. So proposed land use doesn't come hand in hand with the existing land use. There's a certain analysis based on that, you come up with a proposed land use. Now, and then if you're looking at compensation, see, if you in the city area, except the Bharatipuram area, the good thing is the rest of all the city area, there's no habitation or settlement. So that's the positive thing. Now, how we address the Bharatipuram area, which is, sorry? No, these are private lands, but I'm talking about human habitation and settlements, all right? So what you have is only in this area, where the Porombokia, I think somewhere here. Here. So this is the only area where we actually have human habitation and settlements, which has happened the last 10, 15 years, unfortunately. But the rest of this thing, we might have private lands, but we don't have, village settlements and other things. So again, like I said, when we do this farm simulation, and then we understand, when we look into the realities, how we match it, maybe we might have to compensate certain things which we are losing there to some other place, or we come with a phasing plan where we see whether these could be acquired. I don't know. These are things which needs to be explored. But ideally, the first thing would be is to see whether we could achieve completely over here as a part of the galaxy. Now, if it doesn't happen, then probably we need to shift things. But how do we address it? By giving recommendations and policies, probably we will we can update the foundation to say, look, these are the things, and if this could be helped in certain way, I think we would be able to get back the land, whatever. And if we have lost all the options, then probably we have to look at, seeing how we, updated, migrated, adjusted or something. That has to be done. And the timeline which you're looking at. So timeline, I was not clear. Timeline for?
No, I was thinking what to be taken into account, because land compensation will have a longer timeline. So right now we are in a different phase. So how do we incorporate those kind of scenarios?
See, like I said, let's keep. I think the vision is to understand and decode the urban form, right? Water is something which is very, it has to be there. So there are certain elements like percolation, it's there, geology is there. These are things that we can't change the whole geology. But these kind of things, maybe if you have anything specific, we can go look back and come specifically and try to see what it could be addressed. But my suggestion right now is to consider that land is available. And if you could work on it, that will be helpful. And personally for me, I think this whole thing is about certain movement and positivity. So let's keep that momentum up rather than getting blocked into all these nitty-gritties.
Okay, we have under 10 minutes, so if the next people could keep their questions shorter and responsive, that would be great.
I try.
Turn it on again. Sorry.
Okay, I tried to make it really short. So there was one observation when you talked about the aspects of a DDP, especially for Auroville. I was missing as key aspects the dream and the charter. I think they are really important and are for me the main raison d'etre for Auroville. So maybe they can be kind of integrated in whatever step we are doing. And then it was about the DDP being prepared by a qualified planning authority. And as I said, I don't expect answers right now. It's probably too short, and maybe this one is also a bit provocative. Is the question I think many people in the community are asking if the present TDC is actually a qualified planning authority. There has been a lot of people coming, going. You are the only architect in the whole community-appointed team. There was one question, how do you stand with that? Coming directly to who is the client body of the present TDC? What is your relationship to the RA? You have published some statements which are giving the impression that you actually are not really feeling that you are bound by the RA. And I think, and when we are, as you many times mentioned, in a proposal or exploration phase for all of that, and this will be presented and it needs approval. So why are we actually right now creating conditions on the ground when we are actually not really knowing where we are going, what we are doing? Thanks.
Okay. So the first is obviously, yes, the charter, it goes without saying, I think definitely the charter and all these things are the key essential. Nothing starts from that. So I fully agree with you. There's nothing for me to go about it. And the second was about, I think we are in a very critical time. I'm talking in terms of the development which is happening around us. And I'm sure you'll also agree with it, right? And how do we go and present ourselves to the outside world? We need to have certain legal validity. And the Act and other things gives us the legal validity. That is the only thing. We stand on the Auroville Foundation Act. And the Act has a certain definition of what the governing board is. And the best way at this point for us to really take to the outside world when we are doing the DDP, when we are working with all these things, is to ensure that we are legally compliant to go and meet with the other departments on the other side of the wall, right? And the best way it could be done is it has to be officially authenticated as per the Act. And the Act mentions about a governing board, and the governing board has issued us a office order, which is based on a standing order. Now, what it empowers us is, it empowers us to go and talk to, whether it's TCPO or whether it's we want to do all these things. That is the only way we can actually make it. By doing that, I personally believe we are actually helping Auroville to actually move in the right direction. But this is the actually if you see this is the only possible solution we can do. And I see all these things are here to help us. I don't see any contradiction in that. And when we are looking at doing planning. Planning is a legal subject. It can't be done without having certain legal validity. So that's why, I think we have to respect that standing order. We have to work as per the standing order. So I think that is about the thing. And second is, where do I stand in terms of the validity of the present TDC or whatever it is? See, for me, it is all about being bold in getting things done. Now, I also want to be like all of you. I would like to go and have a good sleep and would like to spend good time with my wife and have a happy thing. No, Mark, I think sometimes you should also. No, but light mass probably, but 2.5 years, it's not to take all these things when there's been no funding and everything. It's not something nobody expects that to do. But why should somebody do it? Because I see this is the easiest way to move forward. It will help us to collectively move forward. Somewhere we need to legally ground ourselves. We need to identify what we are. And like I said, that what you see, the development which happened from Kuila-Palyam to Certitude is a wake-up call for everybody. It's not and we can talk about what we are, how we are for another 50 years, but will the outside world wait for us? I don't think so. The outside world is going to wait for us. They're going to keep moving in, encroaching on us, or working for whatever it is. And my biggest fear is, in the end of the day, we'll be refugees in our own land, something like that. So I feel this is something which is very time bound. It has to be done. These discussions could always happen, and probably we have all the time in the world, but these things should not be stopped. And I feel that this needs to go ahead. And my contribution is, I come from that point of thing. And the others in my office also, I'm sure they are being there because they feel this would help things to move forward. Maybe in the long run you will be able to see the things. But right now, when you are standing from my point of perspective and see, I find this is the right thing which I can do.
We just have 1 more minute, so if it's a quick question. And then other questions, I appreciate there's a lot, but they can be written down and we'll pass.
Yeah, guys, only 1 minute is left, okay? So Omar, make it extra short.
Extra short. So lengthen it and shorten it.
One quick comment is that all of these presentations will be on an online Google Doc. So all the drawings and this will be available to everyone. Second, I have a question about because you have mentioned many few consultants, and every time I hear few consultants, I get a little bit worried. So if there is understanding that there will be implementation drawing coming from one source, or there could be, for example, drawings coming from infrastructure implemented separately from drawings coming from planners.
How could that be? You are an architect.
Yeah, exactly. But things are happening in this way, actually. So
how could you? You have anything to substantiate? I don't think so. It's happening.
So it will come
for the DDP,
from one source.
Yes, obviously that's why we have an external lead consultant. You do any building, you work with a structural consultant, infrastructure consultant, and they work in collaboration with the architect, right? So then the architect works on it. So that's how it should work. How can you do a structural design without even the architect knowing it?
Okay, so infrastructure coming from the main DDP team.
So they will be they have to work in collaboration with the lead consultant, and then things has to evolve out of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So basically, Vastuship will be pulling all the consultants giving one output.
Finally, we'll be having one draft DDP. Like I said, Vastu Shilpa consultants will be working on the DDP part of it, but there is also the legality part of it, like TCPO and other things, which we will be working on. And apart from that, it is also our duty to also provide the necessary information, whether it works of Roger, the urban design framework or whatever. I'm sure probably in a short term, it might be very difficult for them to really understand it unless we provide them these documents. So as a client for them, it's our responsibility to give them all these things, and then it has to be done. Like I said, this is a much different from how we do it in the outside world. It has to be much more different in a very different collaborative way.